Hey everybody, this is Perch. I'm here with Joe Corallo, and I'm here with Richard Case. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Doing great.
Richard, I'm really thankful that you were able to come on and chat a little bit about it. I think you created one of certainly the most memorable, and even more so with the show that took so much of that run on Doom Patrol. Probably one of the most impactful comic runs, I think, of this era, where I'm concerned. I've been very anxious to talk to you, and glad you're here.
Well, thanks for having me, and welcome to be here. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Joe,
always fun to talk about the old days.
Yeah.
The good days.
Yeah, the good old days.
Joe and I have done a lot of these retrospectives. Joe, thank you again for joining me with this as well.
No problem. I am always here to talk about Doom Patrol, multiple runs, but also, Grant Morrison and Richard Case's run. But yes.
So Richard, this run, starting with issue 19, this would be in the late 80s. Was this 88 or 89? I think.
I believe it was 88.
Yeah.
You
actually, I don't remember exactly when the first issue came out, but I started work on it in 88.
That makes sense. Yeah. And you were coming on with Grant Morrison, who was certainly not the name he is today. I mean, he still had some buzz, but and it was a promise of kind of completely reimagining Doom Patrol, taking it in a completely new direction. And how was that pitched to you? And when you were asked to come on the title, what did that feel like? What was that? What were they telling you?
It was very interesting, and I was actually reluctant at first because while I've read some Doom Patrol, back at that point, it had only just came back. So my only other exposure to it was those 3 issues of Showcase when they first brought them back in the 70s with Paul Kupperberg and Joe Staton drew it. That was my first exposure to the Doom Patrol characters, and I found them very interesting. But it didn't really stick as oh yeah, those are great. Not until I went back and then read some of the stuff from the 60s, the original stuff. But back then it was harder to find some of that, so I didn't. I picked up a few back issues and found them interesting, but I didn't get enough of them to really dig in. So I was aware of them, and I'll be honest, I wasn't with the current run that was coming out at that time in the 80s. I just found, to me, it felt like it was just trying to be DC's answer to XMen, even though obviously there's so many parallels, but it felt to me like a watered down XMen book to me. I just didn't really find it that appealing personally. And at that time I was working on Doctor Strange for Marvel, and that was a character I had always loved. But I'd been on it for a year and a half at that point, and was starting to feel like, maybe could be some other things to start looking into. And I had just moved to North Carolina. And so before I did that, I didn't really know anybody at DC, but a friend of mine said, hey, before you move away, why don't you, because I was still living up Northeast, why don't you come on over with me and I'll introduce you to some DC editors and stuff like that before you, so it's yeah, that sounds like a good career move long term. So I left samples while I was there. So I had been living in North Carolina about 2 weeks when I got an actual telegram. and back when they had such things, and it was Bob Greenberger. He's he saw some of the. I didn't actually meet him when I went to DC, but I left some of my samples. Got to his desk, and he said, based on some of what I'm seeing here, I think you might be an interesting choice to be artist. We're revamping Doom Patrol. If you have any interest, give us a call. So I gave him a call, and I started to hear the pitch, a little bit about the pitch, and he mentioned Grant's name. And of course, at that point, I didn't know who Grant was. He had only just, I think, issue 2 of Animal Man had just hit the stands at that point, which was basically his first U.S. exposure. So he sent me Grant's pitch, and while I was looking that over, and I also hit the comics shop and got the first 2 issues of Animal Man. Quickly realized, all right, he's doing some great. He's a very gifted writer. There's some great, like even with issue 2, there's great cliffhangers there. And then I read the pitch, and Grant's pitch was I'm thinking it was like 60 pages long. It was a very developed pitch.
Wow.
It pitched his whole philosophy, basically his manifesto for what he thought Doom Patrol could be. Then spotlighted each of the major characters, and then especially the ones he introduced, Crazy Jane, and also the concept of Rebus was big in that original pitch. And then even broke down, he outlined more or less the first year of what he had planned for Doom Patrol with this revamp. And once I read all that, I was like, yeah, I totally sign me up. It's like, this is an amazing opportunity to be able to work on this. What really attracted me to it was, a totally different take on what these characters could be, and really what superhero, like the whole philosophy of superheroes, like there was a big part of what he wanted to dig into with them that I really felt lacking with the current Doom Patrol at that time, was that these are characters that are supposed to be somewhat unsettling. Nobody wants to be like, if most anybody, when you ask him if he wants to be a superhero or superheroine, they're thinking Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, sure,
the iconic.
Nobody wants to be Robot Man, a brain without a body, put in a tin can, that kind of thing. And so he really wanted to embrace the psychological aspect as well of what, characters like this that have been dealt this horrible yet very cool opportunity at the same time hand to them. And that was a big part of the root of what was going on there, that I really was like, that's exciting. That sounds like it'll be a great fun to explore visually. So,
and it crossed really quickly.
Yeah. In Grant's pitch, or maybe some of the stuff that was coming out of it, like I think I remember something about Grant either discussing or other people discussing how the approach to Doom Patrol was almost like the opposite reaction to something like Watchmen or The Dark Knight Returns, where they wwere leaning into like the more serious nature of comics. Like Doom Patrol was like taking camp seriously.
Yeah. No, that was another aspect that was totally enjoyable about it, was like it delves into some of the very serious things, like the whole background of Jane. Obviously, that's a very serious notion of what, that kind of horror from a parent, what that can do to someone's psyche can do. But at the same time, you had the Brotherhood of Dada in there, those elements, and it was that total camp humor with the serious notions of some of the darker psychological stuff that was particularly fun. Like we could have an issue that was just totally, the Monsieur Mala and brain issue, for instance, where it was just pure camp, and it fit somehow. And so that was an interesting challenge too, as to how to come up with a style that worked across that broad scope kind of thing. So
you did, in terms of the art, especially when you're getting into these concepts that are very camp, but I've heard this comment that it was camp taken seriously, but it felt like camp taken respectfully. And you put I mean, you put incredible detail and bringing different art styles and different, I mean, completely different historical art styles into the pages. That I think that's a big reason why you can take this seriously. Is it looked like the art was taking it seriously?
I think some of that was also like that was part of the appeal for both of us too. Was like because we both have an art background, and so like the fact that I got to delve into all the different movements of modern art was a really fun challenge for me. But also, we have a deep nostalgia for all the weird, like that very first page that where you see Mr. Nobody, and all the different weird shit. You know, like that was just like digging through old comics, and so we had a love for that. You know, source material of the weird ads in the back of comics, and it's like, well, what if I had those things? All that weird stuff that all kind of went into that, and we all had that love for all that kind of stuff. So I think some of that is what comes across in what we delivered.
Yeah. So what were some of your favorite comics, growing up then, and before you became a professional comic artist?
I mean, I was a Marvel guy. More Marvel growing up. I loved the Avengers. I loved XMen. As like the Claremont Byrne XMen, Daredevil were big influences early on. But I liked some of the goofy, DC 60s kind of stuff too. I found some more of that later. But then, like as I went to art school, I was starting to actually go out of comics for a bit. I was, I wanted to be the serious artist more. But then Alan Moore's Swamp Thing came along, and things like Love and Rockets came along, and those were things that started pulling me back into comics, into a different kind of like, oh, it's not just superheroes. So there was those aspects of things that started to bring me in to start thinking about comics in different ways, even while I was going through art school and still thinking, all right, I'll be a serious artist or illustrator or whatever. By the time I got out of art school, that's by then, like Simonson's Store was coming out and stuff. I was lucky enough to meet Simonson because we went to the same college, Rhode Island School of Design. He came there to talk at one point, and it was through that I was able to eventually get an internship with him. And that was, once I did that, that was like kind of bringing my serious attitude towards comics and really wanting to think of that as a career started to come out of that. So, so that's where a lot of that kind of
I got it from. So as you're developing your style, so it's an interesting journey. I think I have a degree in art, and I remember feeling the same as this is going to be. I played around with comics, and now I need to, step out of comics to something more serious. And the people that pulled me back, like you, it was Alan Moore, and certainly a lot of that work, Simon, and what they were doing. So how was it? You worked under you interned with Simonson. Yeah. What was that like at that point? Because this will seem unrelated, but I promise it's all the same. I read another interview of yours, and you talked about, what I think a lot of people take for granted is we can do what we're doing right now. You can just jump on a computer and quickly pass ideas back and forth. You can scan a page, you can get information, and it can happen instantly. And this interview, you're talking about you're trying to pass notes to Grant, and you're calling him, and it was a shared phone. So then somebody has to get Grant,
back then, he was in Scotland, of course, living in Glasgow, and where he was living in his apartment, he didn't even have his own phone. So there was like one phone for the whole hallway, and if I had questions directly to, like, most of my questions, I could field through the editor at DC, who originally was Bob Greenberger, and then I went through like 3 different editors along the way. but there were times where it's like I just need to talk directly to him. It's like,
sure,
there'd be some concepts in there. I was like, all right, you're gonna have to explain this one to me,
yeah.
And for the most part, he did for as many strange concepts that are in Doom Patrol, he did a very good job of explaining it very well to me in the script. But there were some times there was like, all right,
yeah,
Grant, you're just gonna have to tell me. And of course, I'm hearing it through, his payphone and the hall phone and international, and plus his thick Scottish accent. So I don't know how much more information I really had at the end of the discussion sometimes. But yeah, that was definitely an interesting challenge at that point.
Well, and so that led me to, that's what I said, it's connected. So you're interning with Simonson. I mean,
Yeah.
but the same thing, like how I mean, what was it like interning at that period where you don't have the convenience? I'm talking to current artists and they're working with other people. It's like, oh, we're on Zoom 2 or 3 times a day. It's like,
yeah, I would. So at that point, this is like just after I graduated. Actually, I started it while I was still in school, because at RISD we had you have a winter session program. So for 6 weeks, like starting in January till mid-February, you could either take something outside of your major, or that was also at a good time to try and set up internships. And so my initial internship was during that 6-week period. And so I would just live at my folks' place in New Jersey and commute in. Mm-hmm. So I was doing that like at least 4 out of the 5 days a week. Wow. To just spend time and glean what I could from him. Most of what I was doing at the beginning stages for him was literally helping him with his clipping file. So something you don't even need anymore. This is pre-internet, so you couldn't look everything up on Google Images and to find all the things you need. So he had a vast collection of magazines that he would mm-hmm. basically shred up and then put it into files, so that like old issues of National Geographic example, and then I would by country, or if it's like particularly interesting houses, any of those kind of things. It's like we had a whole system, and so I spent a lot of time doing that. I would help. I was starting to get good enough at learning perspective that I could help Greek in some backgrounds for him, and he would basically draw everything over what I did, but I would at least set up the basic structure of a house or a building or something like that sometimes for him. By the end, a fair amount of what there were some whole little scenes where it's like I kind of drew a lot of what was in there, and he would just give it the Simonson flair over top of it, but the structure of it was largely there. So yeah, for the 3 months, that next whole summer, after I graduated, I continued doing that kind of work for him. And this was during his time on X Factor, when Wheezy was writing X Factor and he was drawing it. Yeah. So
well, that was I mean, I can't. That had to be one of the best places to learn from. I mean,
it was a tremendous place to learn from, and it definitely helped open doors because, obviously, it's his name is widely recognized in comics, but also the fact that I got to meet and hang out with him. His studio mate at that time was Jim Sherman. Chaykin was one of his former studio mates. But he'd already moved out of the studio at that point. But still got to meet him. I still got to meet Frank Miller and Bill Sienkiewicz during those times, when they would occasionally just kind of stop in. And I was like, of course, I'm just like, oh. But
that's awesome.
But yeah, and also I got to learn some of the basics of coloring while I was working at his studio, because there wasn't always, like, Walt didn't always have something for me to do, but maybe Jim might have something for me to do. And actually, Elaine Lee was working with Jim at that time too, doing some coloring. And so I actually got to learn some coloring along the way. In fact, my very first credit in comics is co-coloring an issue of Steel Grip Starkey.
Wow.
Because I did maybe 10 pages of it, which was cool. So
nice.
I think, and I'm so anxious to talk Doom Patrol with you, but this is fascinating. It feels like the environment today is probably a lot harder. I don't know. I mean, on one hand, there's a lot more manual to what you're describing. You know, you don't have all the technology we have today to kind of get things shared, but it's the same approach. When I went to art school, I remember they were teaching us lettering, and we were hand doing the fonts. I mean, we were ink, and today, I mean, they're teaching that largely with moving pixels around on a screen, and I think you miss something in the technique. Do you think that today it's easier, but maybe harder at the same time for people to really pick up those skills?
Yeah, I do. Like, there is certain aspects I feel like, you know, I think it's still good to learn some things, you know, old school, as it were, especially when it comes to drawing and perspective type. Like even in Photoshop, there are perspective tools where you can do things, but I think it still helps knowing, like, going through the learning process of setting up grids and seeing things, because sometimes you can just see, something's a little off, and you can start to identify what that is because you've trained your eye to actually see how the anchor points of perspective, you know, the vanishing points all work and stuff like that. I will say I did take some graphic design classes when I was in art school, and it's like, and using I think it was Placky is the black and white paint that you use to make a really graphic black and a really graphic, like doing the squares of that and moving bits of that around. It's like you could do it in so much of a fraction of a period of time in, you know, Illustrator or Photoshop, and digitally now is like, I don't know that there was a whole lot gained by, like, it's like, you know, that's a skill that's like, you know, doing it all manually. It's like, there's no reason to have gone through that. And same, I feel a little bit about that with fonts even. It's like, but at the same time, it's good to be able to, you know, modify and
I don't
gain you know, the whole part of manually font, or, you know, customizing fonts a bit too. So there is a sameness to just, you know, using a font library that by doing some stuff, you know, manually.
I miss cutting lith by hand. That was
what was that?
I said I don't miss cutting lith by hand.
Yeah, exactly that. It's like, you know, you probably remember how many students would come in with Band-Aids on their fingers from doing those kind of tasks till 3 in the morning, and then they have their X-Acto blade slip on them or something like that. It's like, I saw that happen way too often for somebody or another.
Oof. I got to since you were talking about, you know, fanboying a bit over, you know, like Bill Sienkiewicz and Frank Miller and all that. I heard from what was it? This is a few years ago. Nick Bertozzi, who you know, what was it? He was working at DC at the time, and, you know, he's gone on to do a bunch of graphic novels, mostly historical stuff, like stuff on Ernest Shackleton and Andy Warhol, things like that. And he's a professor at SVA now, but. He had, like, you were at some sort of DC, you know, either shindig or, you know, some sort of get together at some point. And, you know, he was telling me how he was, like, you know, geeking out over you being there, being like, oh my God, you know, Richard Case is, you know, here. So I just thought it was, you know, it's funny how, you know, the generations sort of go and people, you know, coming up.
Yeah, it is. And of course I think of that as like, well, no, I can't even come close to holding a candle to people like Sienkiewicz and Walt and Frank and stuff. But you know,
no, you certainly established a definite piece of history here. I mean, just getting into the book. But yesterday, I mentioned that we'd be doing a Doom Patrol retrospective. I didn't mention that you were going to be our guest as a surprise. And some of the comments were. Man, it'd be so cool if you could talk to Richard Case. I wonder what he's doing. You gotta find him. I'm like, just wait. So it's there. People know you, and I think I mean, this run of yours and Morrison's that was collected in this omnibus. It's interesting because I loved it when I read it, in floppy when it first came out. Years and I'd revisit it from time to time, and then years later, of course, we had the TV show, the 2 seasons, and those 2 seasons, it's for all intents and purposes, it is adapting that run. I mean, a lot of it
largely is, which was like. I remember when they first announced it, and I was like, "Oh, what are they going to do?" It's like, is it going to be all across the board and stuff like that? And the closer it came to it actually coming out, I was like, "Wow, it really sounds like they're doing a lot from our run." And to be able to then see it when it came out, and there's scenes that are almost shot by shot, right out of our book, and I was like, that was it's so cool and so humbling, and it was just kind of neat to.
I want that guest appearance of you in season 3. That's just, we need to get you in that show.
Honestly, if COVID wasn't still a thing right now, because I know some people on the set and stuff, and I was like, I'm sure I could suggest it and see if I can make it work, but I'm just knowing that they go through these COVID tests every day to be on set, and I was like, this is probably not the right time for me to try that. So maybe by season 4,
or be the voice of a robot.
There you go.
Or that. So we'll see. But I will say, I did get to visit the set when they were shooting season 1. It was late in the season at that point, but a number of the episodes were already out, so I'd already seen them. And that was one of the first things that some of the actors even asked me, "Oh, have you been actually watching it?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm definitely loving what you guys are doing." So, but I was thrilled to be there, and they were thrilled to have me. Which they told me even ahead of time that the person that helped get me on set was one of the stunt coordinator guys, and he says, "Oh yeah, they're really can't wait to meet you." And I kept thinking, "Oh yeah, they're just saying that." It's like, no, they actually really did seem like they were very thrilled to have me there, and it was just really neat to talk with some of the writers and many of the stars of the show. And some of the stunt people, and everybody was just really gracious. I brought a bunch of prints along with me as well, and just started kind of passing them out to different
cool
members of the set and stuff like that. And so I think it was a good day for all of us that way.
Yeah,
so, nice. So when you were before you start with Doom Patrol 19, did you have to go through any of the invasion tie-ins, or did they have to tell you?
That was the nice thing, was they really left it. They really cleaned it up nicely. I think Paul Kupperberg was gracious enough to, he killed off some of the characters he even introduced, so that we would come in with a clean slate. I think the one tiny bit of leftover, well, there were a couple little things where Rhea Jones was still around, but she was in a coma, and then you saw what we ended up doing with her later on. And then it was that invasion thing that was that's what set off Jane's powers. That was the one tie-in to Jane had all the personalities, but it wasn't until the invasion that there's one reference to that, and that's what gave each of the personalities a superpower. But I think we only mentioned that at the very beginning, and then it's just that's just the way it is, and we didn't dwell on it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, it was remarkably well set up. Issue 19, and I was surprised. I was reading, trying to find some of the earlier issues, and just the whole run seemed remarkably gracious in saying, here's this new writer and a new vision, and there's a bunch of stuff in the letter pages. It is is really kind of teeing up. I had to go back and unbag some stuff, and it just, you don't see that today. When they change creative teams, you don't see this.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's some of the sign of the times too. Like, like how many comics even have letters pages anymore?
Yeah, not really.
You know,
and that's something I miss. I mean, but I guess that's, you know, that was the part of the community that was the only way you got that back then. Now you have forums and any other number of ways that you can communicate as fans. Not to mention you could follow the writer or the creative team on, you know, social media and all that kind of stuff. But back then you had the letters page, and that was about it. So you had that as part of the forum, was that they could introduce somebody that way. Not that you did see it a lot, and that was a nice thing that, you know, that they did. We had those opportunities where they wrote up a nice, like, here's a whole new thing, and gave even Grant a platform to talk about, like, what some of his plans were. I believe that was in the very first issue, if not the first issue, certainly within that first story arc. Grant was given the opportunity to, you know, talk at length about, you know, his intentions for the book. And some of that comes straight out of some of what was in that original pitch that I first read.
It was remarkably well handed off. I'm looking at one of the letter pages now, and it was very, again, it was a very nice handoff. They gave him a chance to really talk through what was coming in, looks like, the second issue. And they highlighted the whole team. I mean, there's comments here about the inker who departed, and then on, and he was
only there one issue. I never did ever have a conversation with Carlos, so never knew what that was all about. But I was also happy because Scott Hanna followed, and he was a friend of mine already.
Nice.
So I loved working with Scott, even though we only did 5 issues together or something like that.
Yeah, I loved his inks on your stuff, on your pencils. No, I mean, it's remarkable. And even when the Morrison run ended, you continued to do some issues with the Rachel Pollack run as a way to kind of, was it just to keep continuity a little bit of?
I mean, it was a little bit of that. Some of it was contractual, because my contract went 2 issues past Grant's.
I see.
And so I originally signed on to do 2 more issues, and then the way Rachel ended up writing it was that first storyline kind of lasted 3 issues. So I said, sure, I'll see at least that out. But I had already, at that point, I don't know if I'd signed on already, but we'd already at least started discussions with Jamie Delano and Art Young at that time to do Ghost Dancing, which was my next book I did after Doom Patrol. So I was definitely getting ready to move on to that at that point. So
now this is an interesting time too, because it was switching over from being mainline DC to Vertigo, with Rachel taking over the book.
Right.
Was there any real difference in that? Like, was there a different feel or operations or anything, or did it just feel like the same thing?
Pretty much the same thing. The real change happened for us. It was issue 37. That is when they actually made it a suggested for mature readers title.
Right.
And so they were already starting to move in that direction. They just hadn't packaged it as a separate imprint yet. But for the existing titles, I really didn't feel like they changed all that much to then get branded as Vertigo. We were already going that way. But yeah, with issue 37, we could suddenly, and we kind of really went with it. It's like, there could be some mild nudity, and I think you could start using some cuss words in there. And so, I mean, it was with that issue that we first really reveal Rhea coming out of the cocoon and all her naked glory. And so I wasn't necessarily discouraged to hide her nudity. because that was like, all right, we're pushing this. It's part of like don't overdo it, but I kind of took it as, well, it's a way to kind of demonstrate that it's a more mature book. I mean, it was already going that, like, we already had the Simon Bisley covers, had it for a year at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So there was something just about those elements. I mean, obviously it was a much more mature type title anyway. But it just kind of freed up some of those type things that, I think the biggest change with Vertigo came along was what it did for the creative titles. So when Enigma, and it let those writers really do something that's not so tied into all the other DC continuity, kind of see. So that's why you saw Peter Milligan with Enigma, Grant with Sebastian O. Trying to remember what some of the other launch type titles were, but Jamie and I then got to do our own thing with Ghost Dancing. So
nice. And you brought up the Simon Bisley covers. Now, you did the covers up through issue 25, I think.
Yep. That's right.
And then they not only did they bring in Simon Bisley to do the covers, but they changed the logo, the layout of the covers.
Yeah.
Everything.
So it was Grant's idea to have that cover layout with the white stripe.
Mm-hmm.
That came from Grant, as far as I know. I suspect he may have worked with Ryan Hughes, who did I'm trying to remember if he did the original logo as of that time. I know he did the logo that was more the different type fonts that was introduced maybe with issue 50, which was my favorite logo. I just love that logo. It had a very Dada quality to it.
Yeah.
And Bisley came in on the covers, and Mark Waid that was his first issue as editor, I believe. So that was also part of the mark, the mark that Mark wanted to make on the book, I believe, was. Which, of course, at that time I was like, "Oh, you're taking covers away from me." I was a little disappointed, but as soon as I saw Simon's covers, I was like, "Yeah,
nice."
I'm not going to say another word because they were amazing.
And that was Mark's idea to bring in Simon, or
as far as I know, that may have come up from even higher up than Mark, because he was working under Karen Berger at that time.
And then
when we first started on Doom, like when Grant and I first started, and it was just Bob's book, Karen wasn't a part of that. But by then, by 26, I think, Mark was working under Karen, and then after Mark left, it was Art Young, who was previous to that Karen's assistant. So it kind of started to go toward like many of the books that became Vertigo books under Karen's umbrella of books. So.
Nice.
I don't know all the workings of how it worked editorially, but it was something like that.
You had a few editors during the run. I think you had 4 editors.
Yeah, 4 altogether. So it was Bob, Mark, Art Young, and then Tom Pyre.
Yeah. Tom was on a decent amount at the end. I think.
No, I had a great working relationship. I really had a good working relationship with all of them. But probably I had the longest tenure with Tom. And we had great fun working on that book. Just brainstorming with Tom about stuff was great fun. It was actually with Tom and talking about the Doom Force special. Oh my God, we had so many fun plans to do with that book. I started throwing out all these different ideas we could have for. Because back then the gimmicky covers were all coming out too, so we were talking about all kinds of different ridiculous gimmick covers we could do for it and stuff like that too.
Yeah, that was amazing, and it seemed like Doom Force Special #1, collector's issue, all that. Who's going to die? Pointing to the, all that.
Jasper, or whatever his name was.
Jasper, and so what's so interesting about that issue in particular is it's such a pointed and direct satire on what Marvel was doing, and you got so many high-profile artists as well. You worked with Walt again on that.
Yeah, I specifically asked to get, which I thought was particularly funny because, Wheezy was working with Liefeld on X-Force, or at least with New Mutants, for a bit there too. So there was a certain fun, and I was thrilled that he said yes, even though it was only like 6 pages or whatever it was.
Yeah, that was incredible though, because all things considered, this came out, sort of poking fun at Liefeld sort of style at the one of the heights of his career. I mean, he was
pre-Image. It was for sure.
How did fans and people react to that issue?
I mean, what I heard was everybody loved it. I mean, and pros too. It's like I can remember the first con I went to, and a bunch of people were just a bunch of comics artists were just dying laughing over what we had gotten away with that book.
I remember a pretty positive reception. It was funny because it was all the people who weren't buying X-Force were super into it. They just
and I'm sure people that were big Liefeld fans probably hated it, but those fans, most of them aren't my fans necessarily. To be fair, though, I've talked to Rob a number of times, in recent years, and he's actually a really great guy. It's we actually grew up loving a lot of the same stuff, of Marvel stuff in the mid '70s. I think we both started collecting around the same time, but yeah, we definitely went different directions artistically.
I remember people who are fans of that book looking at this and saying, see, DC's getting on the ball. They're doing what sells. They're doing what we like. And the people who weren't into X-Force going, this is the funniest pair. This is the funniest thing ever. And it was just, it kind of worked on both ends. I don't remember anybody really angry about it. But it's such a good...
I never heard anybody that hated it. Let's put it that way.
No, it was a good... It was a great. That was a great little thing to slide in, and very unexpected, I think. Which is weird to say, given everything else that was going on in Doom Patrol. The idea that anything could be unexpected at this point was kind of silly, but it did. It was great.
And that wasn't even the first time you guys took direct aim at Marvel. There was the Beard Hunter issue, which I don't think you.
Sure. I did not do that one.
You didn't do that one.
Giordano did that. Who's an amazing painter now, but yeah, he did that one issue, and it was great. It was just a total, slam at the Punisher at that time. There's so many funny. I recently reread that, and it's there's just so many funny. The whole thing with his mother, and that relationship is just hilarious.
It's funny.
Things about that issue, and also there was the issue that the Kirby type issue.
Yes,
that also I didn't draw, but Ken Stacy did a beautiful job of doing a Kirby look, and oh my God, there's again such great. It was so cool that they let us do these kind of things on that book.
Yeah, and that issue was a riff on, was it Fantastic Four 51 with the Thing's body swaps, and it's a villain in the Thing's body, and he ends up sacrificing himself to save Reed Richards.
I don't remember the exact issue or story, but
it was some of that, and then also some of the whole Silver Surfer Galactus bit was.
Oh yeah,
too,
Yeah, that was in there, and then there was also the XMen issue.
Oh yeah,
which again, obviously a very pointed, critique. There was, what was it? It was cuddle, kiss, and torture, I think, were the three.
Right.
Yeah.
And they had little name plaques.
Yeah, they had their little name plaques.
Weirdly forward thinking with Marvel getting bought by Disney. So it was.
Yeah, right.
No,
yeah.
That's some great stuff. It's funny because the book managed to be extremely unique and introducing a lot of things, the Brotherhood of Dada and kind of all those different elements, but then nice cutting parody at the same time. The parody stuff always kind of flowed in very naturally to the book. It never felt like
even with, because a lot of them would turn out to be like one-offs, but it was almost like you needed that comedic break, and Grant did enough tie in with just enough of the regular continuity that it still seemed to flow. And I think, and again, that was even there. A bit of that was even there, even right from the beginning, when he talked about like his overarching storyline. He still, even from the beginning, wanted to have spotlight issues. Originally, just to be like a spotlight on on one of the characters. So the very first one was issue 25, which was a spotlight on Dorothy. Which again, I didn't draw it, but it helped, be able to bring in those elements where between major storylines we'd have that little bit of a break. And I think that because it was there from the beginning, it helped with the whole flow of the overall arc.
Yeah, and what was it? So you had all those sort of things going on with those issues kind of breaking things up. And then, just from what you're saying, which sounds a lot different from a lot of other runs, even back then, is that there didn't seem to be that much editorial interference up high of like, you got to remove this character, you got to have Superman in this issue, you got to have Batman in this issue, we kind
of got that one bit of that out of the way early
with the painting.
with the painting. And I don't know if it was required of us, but they always kind of let us do our own thing. And like with that one issue, it's like just with that brief meeting, you kind of even get like why you get to be able to do your own thing. Cause it's like, as the whole Justice League is just staring at this painting that all of Paris has like just gotten sucked into. They're just like, well, what the hell do we do? And then the Doom Patrol just walk up and just jump right in. And it's like, I guess we'll let them take care of it, And they're still standing around even at the end of that adventure.
Yes.
Justice League are still out there, just like, I don't know what to do. Oh, that kind of thing.
I love that bit because it's more of them show up and just stand around. Like when you first see them, it's a couple of the members, I think, of the Justice League International. And then like you said, they just walk up and hop in, and they're like,
right. And there's that great moment where Cliff, just kind of brushes aside Animal Man, which is like, so it's like two Grant Morrison characters at that time interacting. So that was kind of fun. But
by the time we hop back out, Superman and a bunch of others have shown up, and they're all just they're standing there staring.
Yeah, they're just kind of like, I guess something's happening. Yeah. So
no, it's so
very
great.
Funny moment.
I feel like was Karen probably one of the people who kept you guys doing your own thing? Because
very well could be. I don't remember behind the scenes of how it was that we were able to, but I think it was, if memory serves, even when Bob first brought us on, they were pretty much giving us the ability to just do your thing. You're not going to be, if there's another big cross DC event, we're not going to, you guys don't have to be a part of it. At least that's my memory of it. It's like, we were never going to have to, and I definitely appreciate that, because it's like in the middle of our run, have to do some storyline where we were like, forced to be attached to all the other going on in the whole DC universe, we would have lost something. So, and I think they appreciated that.
You managed to create some of the most, I think, memorable villains during the course of this run. From your first arc, you have the Scissormen, and then you get to, of course, Brotherhood of Dada. You have Red Jack. You have this constant infusion of very visual, very significant villains and characters, and even, I think, as it goes on, starting to question if they're villains. I mean, they're, the Brotherhood of Dada is trying to just do something different, and that kind of flips the whole thing here.
Yeah, you definitely come out of that storyline like, well, really, were they all that bad?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and when we get the Brotherhood back, the whole like nobody for president storyline,
right?
That hit at such a I don't know. This time when I read it. It hit in a different way than it has in the past, because not just for everything that's been going on, but when Mr. Nobody is like, defeated, and he goes on this he monologues about you're gonna miss the absurd, you're fighting the absurd, and all you want is tedium, but you're gonna get sick of tedium, and
hearing that now over the last few weeks, it was like, oh God, it still has parallels, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's weird to read. I mean, I referred to it earlier. I read this originally, and I've caught up with it a few times over the years, and been a while. I watched the show, and the show was filled with a lot of memories of me reading the comic. I mean, that's immediately what you go to of say, oh, I remember this and this. Oh, they're doing this differently. And then I came back and I read through the run again and kind of prepped to talk with you. It's just there's so many additional layers, and this run has held up incredibly well. I mean, compared to other books, Joe and I have done them where the books age badly. Like you think you may have good memory, and you're like, ooh, this is not the same. Even weirdly, I think when Grant would go on to do new XMen, it was a much safer book in almost every respect. What was happened here in Doom Patrol. Yeah. But it feels like Doom Patrol's aged much better than New X-Men, even though New X-Men took a more conservative approach. It's in my view, of course.
Yeah. And I think part of that too is the X-Men, especially by then, were so developed and so ingrained, and that the Doom Patrol characters, I think, even at the time Grant took over, were still they weren't developed enough. That especially when you're bringing in all these new characters to where you could kind of have fun with them.
There's something about Cliff that, especially the way Grant wrote Cliff, where he was, very much the everyman kind of. Like, there were certain aspects of his personality that always showed through, but he was very much the everyman and still wanted to be a hero, but he wasn't just about being a hero kind of thing. Mostly, he was just reacting. He was what kind of humanized, all the weird shit that was going on, because he was just like, "What the fuck is this kind of stuff?" So there's just on that core develop, and it wasn't all about just superpowers too. Like Cliff's powers really aren't anything significant. He's just a strong robot kind of thing. It's not about that. So
do you think this run and everything that happened, I was trying to kind of come to a conclusion of which character was the theme character, and I don't think you can say that with this run. I mean, I've heard arguments and I've read articles saying Jane was the character, and it was her journey ultimately through it. But you can make that exact same argument about Cliff. You can make that argument about many of the characters, actually.
Right. That's the thing. It's like, I don't think it's any one of them. It's kind of the journey for the three core ones, at least. But even Dorothy, to a lesser extent, but Dorothy develops quite a
absolutely
a lot through the whole storyline.
Well, and so big changes with Larry Trainer, and then Rebus. It's also, today we're talking a lot about different factors of gender and everything else, but this was the early 90s, is 15 years ahead of the conversation, really, for a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, before we even had a proper pronoun, I was thinking about it. It was like we didn't even have, Grant referred to Larry / Eleanor as her, but HIR, and but we didn't have different pronouns back then.
No.
And I was thinking about that was one thing that Joe and I talked a little bit about that we might talk about, and I was just kind of reviewing that, and it was like, we didn't do it to do it, just to have that in there. It was it felt like the aspect that it brought to the story was he wanted to have this character, the total yin yang thing of, and I think part of me always wondered, was it originally supposed to be just putting negative man and negative woman, because there was in the previous arc of Doom Patrol there was a negative woman, and then they just decided, well, let's kill her off. Or did it make more sense to Grant to, if it was a total, opposites kind of thing, to put it all into one? It made sense for it to be, a white man and a African American woman, and so it truly is that contrast on multiple sides, and that's part of what really was the nature of that character. To help, again, it's a character that doesn't fit in, and Doom Patrol is so much about characters that don't fit into the norm, kind of thing. And it wasn't necessarily, because we were thinking that it was going to be this movement, or or that's where
it felt like a story idea.
It was part of that whole story, and it happened to, but but at the same time, it's we also realize it's there's not really any other character like this, that has that kind of background in a comic, and why not?
Yeah, no, it had a great impact, and the character was great. I mean, that story was kind of core to the whole arc of how that played out and everything that happened and the evolution of the character. And I'm a big fan. I mean, I've mentioned other places. I always like it when the comic puts these story ideas forward and then rolls them out and really develops them, as opposed to the other, an approach of let's do a press release about this amazing thing we're doing and really lead that way. This story was told on the page, and I think it's powerful.
Right. And there was never any press release about the fact that we were doing it or anything like that. I still remember when North Star came out as gay for Alpha Flight, and it's they made this whole big deal about it, and I was like, do the story first, and then let history make a big deal about it. The fact that they made press releases at that time, to me, seemed shallow. It was not helpful to the story, in my mind.
I agree. I mean, it made the story feel more like junk food at that time.
It was forced.
Yeah,
it was almost like we need to make some kind of political stand. I appreciate that, but what it does for the story makes it feel forced.
Well,
we weren't under any kind of editorial stance that we were going to introduce a character that was basically trans. So
it as a result, I mean, I do not remember anybody there was no complaints about it. There are a lot of people who were into seeing where that journey went with the character.
Part of it was because it was naturally part of the story.
The same thing with Danny the Street was they openly refer to Danny the Street as a transvestite multiple times through the run. Danny uses a lot of queer slang and things like that, like Bonavada and all that throughout the run, and that too was I don't think anyone made a big deal about that being I can't buy this comic. There's a transvestite sentient street in it.
How absurd would that sound? Your logic. I can't buy this comic because there's a transvestite sentient street.
I'd actually like to see that blog just for that. See someone try and pull out, but no, there wasn't. I mean, and during this run, toward the end of it, I was running a store. People were coming in and buying it, and there was not. People weren't complaining about this. Nobody was. It was just that people enjoyed the story, or they weren't reading it. It was one
exactly, and that's really, if it's not your flavor, don't buy it. It really comes down to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, but there's a lot of really standout issues. But I think one of my favorites, one of your favorites, is I think it was issue 30 when Cliff goes into the underground.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
What's some of the stuff that really makes that issue stand out to you?
Well, it was to really dig into Jane's psyche, to give that a visual expression, to really be able to pursue each of the different personalities, that we meet along the way. And I got to, there was chunks of that I even inked, or I started to really play in some collage elements and things like that into it, just because John Nyberg was inking me on that, and he was perfect for some of the stuff that we did together, but there was certain textural stuff that I really wanted to get into, especially looking at some of the books that I was really looking at that really got into the more psychosis type moments.
Mm-hmm.
I would think of what Dave McKean did on Arkham Asylum, and there was a lot of just things he was doing texturally that I was just I wanted to get elements of that in there, so that some of that came through, but a lot of it was just, Jane's just a fascinating character, and being able to really delve into that level of her background was largely what I loved about that issue.
Nice.
And this issue really was one of the ones that they adapted heavily for the show.
Yeah, that one, watching it sent chills. I actually was lucky enough to even see the script ahead of time, and I was kind of astonished. It's wow, it's almost straight out of what we did. Obviously there's some differences, but there's whole scenes in there that again are just right out of what we did.
Yeah. What other moments from this run you got to, as you look back on it, what were some of the things you loved to illustrate? You got the concept and you're I can't wait to put this on paper?
Well, we talked a little bit about it before. It was the Brotherhood of Dada, and being able to go into the different layers of the painting. I grew up even before I went to art school, even when I was in high school, I started to get fascinated with the different modern art movements of 20th century art. And so having that challenge of doing a superhero story, and having it, illustrating it in all those different styles in one issue was just great fun for me. I wish I'd had more time to, even color it myself. And I can still remember leaving. Danny Vazzo was our colorist at the time. Extensive color notes for him, because it's all right, this is the Impressionist style, so it needs to have this, and this is Fauvism. So, and I would do my best to describe, but also send some references to what I was kind of going for through there. Another one was Red Jack storyline with just the opulence of his manner, that and I had come across. It was modeled largely after Versailles. And so I was looking at, I found a book on Versailles. So I was looking all this, opulent architecture, and putting that all in there. And also that was so that issue happened to come out as I was the very month that I was getting married. So the very last page of the first Red Jack story is him holding Rhea Jones and saying, "Today is my wedding day," and that issue was actually out on the stands then. So I was just like, it was just one of those sweet little, life moment things where everything kind of came together.
That's awesome.
And actually, so my inker got that original page back originally, Scott Hanna, and he gifted it to our editor, Bob Greenberger. And I was like, Bob, I need to have that page. So I ended up later doing a nice painted Doom Patrol commission, basically, for him as a trade to get the original of that back. Because it's like, that one kind of means something personally. So I gotta see if I can get that one. So
that's awesome. I love hearing stories like that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Another question is, you started with issue 19. Which was the first issue you illustrated where you were like, I know I started here, but like this is the issue where I'm like, I got it. This is I leveled up, or I really truly understand these characters. Issue or maybe storyline, or kind of whereabouts.
I'd say it was probably the Brotherhood of Dada storyline where it started to really feel like it was coming together. I mean, there's elements from the issues before that you like still feel like there's moments in there I still look back on. It's like, I feel pretty proud about some of those aspects, but the Dada storyline is where it started to really feel like it was coming together for me.
Nice. And were you also a Smiths fan, or was that just Grant Morrison?
No, I mean, I wasn't as big a Smiths fan as Grant, but I definitely dug on the Smith.
And I read this all in like less than a week. Getting ready for this, so it was pretty condensed for me. Which it reminded me that there's the, Cliff saying, "Come on out of the rain" to Jane in issue 19. And then that's how it ends, just about ends.
Pretty much. Right. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Was that all like kind of planned out in advance? Like, did you know that's how you were going to end it before a certain point?
I mean, maybe Grant did.
Yeah. Sure.
I suspect he probably did, to a point, but obviously when I was drawing it, it's like it occurred to me that, this is, it's coming round about that kind of way.
Yeah.
Tried to even get some of the same body language going on there between the scenes, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And were there some times where, maybe you weren't talking to Grant specifically, but had a question, and it was just like you and an editor, like on a phone together in a meeting, kind of being like, maybe between the two of us, we can figure out what Grant meant.
Oh, there may have been. Yeah. Yeah. There's still parts of it like, I don't know what's going on here. And I know I've told this story a couple times, but it's like, there was the whole with issue. Well, it was the issues where they went out into space and at the two alien races that were warring against each other. I'm blanking on their names right now.
That was right about when you meant to mature, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it was during that storyline where, Grant even admitted, like, many people have accused me or thought that I must be writing this book while I'm on drugs. That's never been true until now. And then his whole first issue or page of the script was just him talking about, how he had, I think it was either acid or mushrooms or something, and he just went on this whole little excursion, his trip, and then how that was starting to shape this story. And it's like, I can kind of see where some of that was coming in.
So
that one I just like, all right. I mean, at the core of it, it's a civil war kind of thing, or an outer space war, but that the Doom Patrol just gets tied into. But yeah, as far as the real meanings of some of it, I was like even the background of the Scissormen, like the way that one ends, I'm still not quite sure what happened there.
Yeah, I had heard, what was it? Glenn Hauman was in production at the time in the production room, and apparently
he told me this story too.
Yeah, where he caught like there was some sort of error in the initial
see if I can pull up the exact text there.
Yeah.
Because I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, because he had caught that and was able to go down. Like, I guess he ran down to Bob Greenberger's office and had Bob check it too. And he was like, "Yep, you're right." And they fixed it before it.
So the priests of the Scissormen. There's the white priest and the black priest, and then basically Rebus says. So then. Priest in black, why is there something instead of nothing? And then he says, there is something instead of nothing. And then everything goes normal again. But I think at one point, it was the other way around or something like that. And that's the part that Glenn picked up on. So thank God, right?
Or else a Grant Morrison story would have made sense. Right?
I know. I was like, wait, what?
Or wouldn't have made sense. Whatever. It's
yeah.
But yeah, it's no, but and that always sticks out to me. But and you got to for the last issue is like the send off. You got to ink that issue and do the cover, right?
Yes. So that was very. I'd been dying to do an issue where I could ink it myself for a bit, and so when I knew it was Grant's last issue, I asked again, enough ahead of time that it's like, I really would love to ink this last issue. I know, I'll be pushing it deadline wise and all, but, they were nice enough to allow me that opportunity. So I had great fun just being able to do all the art myself for that issue.
Yeah, and did you also get to do the last cover of the last issue you worked on, 66?
Yep. Yeah, I did the Cliff Steel vending machine kind of.
Yeah, that was a good one. I also love all like the there's only a couple, maybe 2 or 3, maybe slightly more like Tom Taggart covers.
Oh yeah,
and those are I've always loved those covers.
Absolutely. That especially that first one that he did. It was just a big shot of Cliff, the 3-dimensional robot man head with all the different gears and circuitry running behind it.
Just some wonderful art.
I would love to have seen the original. I have no idea exactly how big that thing was, but it's so cool that he was able to do that. And I think Tom Pyre was the one that found him, found his work to then start doing covers for us. So
yeah,
he did that great Danny the Street diorama for the Who's Who as well, which was so cool.
Yeah.
And Tom Pyre also he was the editor between Grant's run and Rachel's.
Yep.
And
I'm pretty sure he found Rachel as well to be.
Yeah.
It was Tom that found her.
And then before she ended up taking over, Tom had this whole thing where he had her write in letters saying she wanted to take over the book in the letters column as like this gag.
Right. Yeah.
And then in like the last issue, like 63, like Tom's like, all right, fine, you get to write Doom Patrol now.
Yeah.
And apparently, like some fans, I think, ended up being like baffled and were like, "What's going on? This girl's just writing into,
these days."
Yeah, But and speaking of these letters, like I am curious, with a lot of what Grant did. Very little of it went back to a lot of like the older villains and characters like Steve Mentlow and those kind of characters. were there people who were like writing in or would interact in any way who were like, when are they just gonna, fight Madame Rouge and the stupid clock face guy?
Yeah.
Dr. Time.
Yeah.
If there were, I didn't see them.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware. Like, I really didn't. Grant probably saw more than I did of the actual letters that came in. I pretty much just read anything that was in the letters pages, and I don't recall too many people, looking for the old days. They were entertained by what we were doing with it. Really, there was the brain in Monsieur Bala.
Yes, which was hilarious. I mean,
yes.
Oh, and then there was Yankee Doodle Dandy.
Yes,
which was the most bizarre thing. Where I think that was Tom found in an old file the cover that we used for the cover of 51, which was like, it's basically a Silver Age character that was never actually released. It was originally going to be an issue of Showcase, I believe. And so the cover was done, but there was never a story, at least that was found. Is at least my remember. So basically, he gifted it to Grant. Look, here's a Silver Age character. Nothing was ever done with it. Go. And that's what you got. That's what Grant came up with. So it's like, yeah.
I remember a bunch of people wondering at the time this and seeming confused with that Kipling was supposed to be John Constantine.
Yeah, so that was the way I heard it. At least was we were just not granted the ability to use Constantine. So Grant came up with the idea of Kipling, which he very much wanted modeled after Richard E. Grant's character Withnail from Withnail, and a movie called Withnail and I. So, and of course, again, this is pre-digital, so I somehow found a copy of that movie, watched it, had to take Polaroids of it because I was renting it, Polaroids of it to see what he looked like in that movie, and then that's how I modeled the character of Kipling from those pictures that I took from it. It wasn't until a little bit later that I realized, wait, Richard E. Grant, that's our first names.
Yeah.
And it's like, was it because of that Grant decided he wanted to use that character, or is it just because he really liked that character? I think it's probably just coincidence that, it's also our names, but yeah, I thought that was just kind of funny.
You never quite know.
With Grant, you really know. Really know right now.
It was funny because when the show came out, I remember a bunch of entertainment sites, I think Screen Rant, some of these kinds of websites, talking about why did the show change Constantine's character from the comic book into this Kipling person. It's like, no, they didn't change it at all. It's just, it's just funny. People's memories are funny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want to ask you, just if you don't mind. So when you're doing a page, because a lot of people right now are really getting into the mechanics of creating comics and making comics and what does it take and everything else. And your pages are often like just incredibly detailed, more than what we see. I mean, you put a lot of effort into everything. I'm looking at issue 33 where you have the Sangria Familia that's really rendered.
Yeah. Drawing that thing was a pain.
How long would a page take you when you're doing this stuff? Because you were on a monthly book.
I mean, I was, obviously some pages were a little longer, but I was trying to keep that page a day, pace going. Obviously some of them took a little bit more time, and I'd have to make up for it somewhere else along the way. But plus back then, again, referring back to the days that we were doing it, being pre-digital, Grant often had a lot of obscure references within one issue. So often the first day or so of us after I had the script, and I might like just quickly do little layouts on the script itself. That's usually I would just kind of break down how I'm going to do it. then I would often like spend a chunk of an afternoon at a library,
Sure,
trying to find references for, like there's a scene in issue 27, I think it is, where it's a flashback scene to these French poets, or maybe they're English, but I don't remember exactly. But I had to draw these poets, and it's like, I don't have any idea what they look like, but I want it to look, at least representative. These are real people. So I went to the library and I, dug up, what I could of what these guys looked like. So there was always stuff like that was often in his script. So there's usually, one day of the month was library day, research day, to like, once I got that script, to just kind of figure out, any of those kind of elements that I would have to do, went into that. And for me, I know not everybody likes doing that kind of stuff. I always found it like fun, kind of like to do that level of the research. It made me feel a little bit like a detective, art detective there. It's just trying to figure out, all right, what does that look like? And so, like, even the chapel that you're talking about, in Barcelona, it's like I had to, find shots of that from different angles and stuff, to make it look authentic. It's a fascinating place. I've always wanted to go. I've never actually been there, but at some point I want to get to Barcelona so I can see that thing that I've drawn.
I visited. You did a good job. It definitely has the feel of it. It's worth. I was struck at the time, and in going back to rereading it now, it's like it rings true. So
nice. Speaking of ringing, issue 44 is another one I really like. It's not only ending the Pentagon stuff, but if you describe the issue to someone, it's basically like, well, Flex Mentalo uses the power of muscle mystery to make the Pentagon round. And then we also are introduced to a telephone avatar monster that then we're introduced to the candle maker who hangs the telephone.
Oh yeah, he hangs up the phone. That's right.
It's one of those things where I'm just like, how did you come up with this telephone avatar character? Just like the design, like you put all this work into this.
Well, I love going through, like, I had this whole collection of books about antiques. So I loved, like, old telephones. I just think are so fascinating, and to be able to take a character, make a character out of him, it was just that love of doing the research. So yeah, that to me, that was just kind of fun, coming up with, like, and also playing with weird proportions. I mean, I know some of the characters that I threw in there into that particular storyline, they had, just really broad shoulders and stuff like that. And it's like, so, I never forgot that it was a comic book. Let's put it that way. It's like I can really play around with proportions and it doesn't. I don't have to necessarily visualize how it's going to translate to film, because especially back then, there weren't superhero movies or TV shows being made. It's like I don't have to know what act. Like, I never ever thought of, like, who was the best actor to play Cliff Steele or anything like that. It just never even occurred to me. I always knew what Cliff's voice sounded like in my head. I never tried to picture what actor would be there. Same with Jane. It's like, I just, I early on, she was modeled a little bit after Patti Smith, in her 70s, Patti Smith, but beyond that, it's like she very much developed into her own character. It wasn't just Patti. It was, there were elements even at the very beginning of, like, fellow students, friends of mine from art school days that were painters, and like, because the very first time you meet her, she's a painter. So like even the sweater she's wearing, that's like, I had a friend that dressed similar to that kind of stuff. Those aspects of that, and then obviously with time, they just develop into their own personality and that kind of stuff. Anyway.
Yeah, it's crazy. That's great. That's what this is all about.
We didn't pick Frasier as Cliff all along. So
one of the guys from that Airheads movie with Adam Sandler was
it was always in Grant's head the entire time.
Yeah, that would have been around, when I guess probably Doom Patrol was wrapping up or something with that movie.
Probably. But, early 90s.
Yeah, that's funny.
It's also funny, like, again, like with issue 44, it's like, it's a horror moment that again, it like takes camp seriously and respectfully, because it is ludicrous that Dorothy is sad and like holding on to, Flex, being like, he hung up and a telephone has literally been hung.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's like, this is so dry and absurd, and it's played completely straight.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's a combo. It's the writing, it's your art. I mean, it always. I mean, I've been trying to put my finger on it. I think this conversation helped me out a little bit. I think every step of the way, you going to the library to do the research, the kind of more manual crap, the fact that you couldn't just immediately start up a Zoom call with Grant and get the answers immediately. I think that having to dig for the answer somehow translates to the page. And when you read this, it feels like a more crafted book. I mean, for lack of a better word, there's depth here.
I mean, there's a point to that, I guess, because in doing my own research and finding my own way, that also liberates other creative avenues that I might have taken it, that it wasn't like just straight up the way Grant envisioned it necessarily. Yeah. So,
I mean, nothing here in this book and everything that I see, I pick up a lot of comics now, and I can see the stock photography image that was the reference point for the thing. And nothing wrong, it's a different business now. You're churning out a lot just quickly on digital, but there's no page in here that looks like something I've seen 100 other places on Google. Every page looks completely crafted, and to the story, to the art, and also to the gags. I mean, you have Cliff's brain slowly running out of fluid because it was drilled and it's sealed up with gum while he fights the. I mean, just the whole every part about that premise and everything is just completely unique, and I love it.
I will say just another little tidbit of that particular story. So by that point, when I first would get a script, my wife would often grab it and read it first, and she was already lying on the floor laughing with that script. I was like, okay, what's going on here? So yeah, that was just one of those. And boy, did we kind of need it after the storyline ahead, between the Jane storyline and then the following storyline where we first meet Kipling. It's like we needed some comedy relief, and boy, did we get it with that one.
Oh yeah.
It felt like the entire foundation of these characters had led up to this scene. I mean, that's the fun. Everything for it was all to eventually set up the visual gag of these two brains looking at each other. I mean,
longingly, yes.
Longingly. Yeah. I don't know. It's.
And I specifically went and looked at like old '60s DC romance comics. For some of the staging of those scenes, I was really trying to bring that element into that.
That's incredible.
I love it.
Something else that's interesting. I wanted to ask you about. You do this book, and then you go on. You work on other comics. It's not until like the early mid 2000s that this gets like collected in trade paperback.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, there was only the first the Crawling of the Wreckage storyline was collected back when we were still doing the book, but that was it, and that was long out of print by then.
Yeah, so it's not till around then that they're putting out the book in like 6 trade paperbacks, and then they go on and do a bunch of other versions of the book. But how was it? Basically about 15 years after you started, a new generation that didn't buy the floppies might not have even been born at the time it came out is starting to get access to this book. And you still go to shows and cons, and you're meeting
back before COVID, of course.
yes before that, but it's like you'd go to some shows, and you're meeting people who are discovering your work, well after it's behind. Like, how does that feel? Initially, like a few years or so back when you were starting to get this like resurgence of the book.
Well, old, but also, no. I mean, it was very cool to to just hear. That people were reading it now for the first time, and that it still felt fresh to them, that it didn't feel necessarily just of its time, and so, I mean, that's just a nice feeling to know that the work stood for itself. So.
Yeah,
one of the comics that, and again, we saw it in the translation to the show. It translates a lot of that. This book holds true. It didn't need. It doesn't feel dated. It doesn't feel like a product of the 80s, 90s. You could roll this out today. Obviously, you have thinner computers and other phones, but
sure.
Yeah, but
technology's different now. But
the technology's different. It's fine. The concept. I mean, if anything, it's so, like we talked about Danny the Street and some of these other characters. A lot of the things going on here are just now starting to play out in storylines in the mainstream, and this book would feel right at home.
Yeah.
It's an incredible piece of work. I mean, easily one of the runs. And I guess when you were contracted to do this, you were given a long contract, right? Or I mean, it wasn't.
It was originally like a year to year contract kind of stuff that I did, and then after a ways in, it's like I don't remember exactly how we did it, but it was like I let my intentions known that it's like I want to stick around as long as Grant does, So if you'll have me, and they did. So.
But it wasn't like we're going to kind of keep things going 3 to 6 issues at a time, and then we'll let you know. And as a result, it felt like everybody was invested.
And I mean, for whatever reasons, you don't really see that these days. It's like I don't know anybody that says, I did a 4-year run on that book, and it's like I don't know too many other people that have done 4-year runs on books.
No, it's unheard of now.
No,
part of that also was like, it was an interesting enough, like, because of the nature of what Grant was writing, because there was so many new elements and new just whole directions to go in. It was always a fun challenge, and so creatively, it was just a ball. I mean, I had a ball working on the book, so why would I stop?
Yeah. Why? Now you have you've made a transition now, mostly out of comics. You're still doing some comics, but you work in the game industry now. And how's that different? I imagine it's dramatically different.
It is, and so like obviously with comics, it is a collaborative effort, but it's mostly a collaboration between 2 or 3 people for the most part. Well, maybe a little bit more. At most 5. When you talk about editor, writer, colorist, inker if you have one, and a letterer. So, but with video games, it's like I am working with like a team of 90. To sometimes depending on where you are in a project. We've worked on projects where other studios have gotten involved, and so you're talking about 400 people working on one project over a chunk of time. Doing monthly comics, it's like you're seeing it come out and getting feedback from people as you're working on it. You're not doing that with video games. It's like you work many years sometimes on a project and then have it come out. And even there, the nature of gaming is changing because you see games out there now, and it's like once it comes out, it's like that's not necessarily the end product. It's like it's always evolving,
right?
So you're seeing it develop while it's out there as well. So, but the biggest as a creator, one of the biggest differences is just like the vast number of people you're collaborating with. So you're only working on one section of. So, and I'm a concept artist. So I will I'll design different elements that will get used in a game. Sometimes it's like just props. Sometimes it's whole environments. Sometimes it is characters. But there's no one big visual that I could say, that's me, that I did that. And it's like, so it's, I very much see myself as a piece within the whole group, whereas, more of my own vision of, who I am as an artist comes through in a comics page just because of that aspect. And, it's cool to have those different sides, yeah. Because I'm not the type that feels like I have to show my work all the time, that I'm happy to blend in and be a part of the team. I think part of the reason I've stayed with doing video games as long as I have, because I've, as I was saying before we started the interview, been doing it almost 18 years now. I enjoy that part of the process, but I do still have, the bit of the creative drive to do some of the other stuff, which is still come back to comics and do that. But I just do that, as part of my time now, versus full time. Just because, and doing it full time, it was for as long, because I did it full time as a job for almost 17 years, and it's exhausting. I mean, it does take a lot out of you. I took very few vacations, and in all those years that I worked in comics, I worked a lot of long late nights, and it's just what it takes to do comics. But as I got older and my kids got older, it's like I started to seek other alternatives to what I could also do creatively and be comfortable, making a living and still have a better life art balance kind of thing. And working in video games has kind of allowed me that. So,
nice. Yeah. And you, from what you're saying and your experiences with like Doom Patrol, it sounds like you got what's kind of a rare opportunity in that you kind of got to leave the book while you were still like you enjoyed it. You weren't burned out, but you also you weren't forced off the book. You left on your own terms. Yeah. And I feel like that's
nice. Very nice the way it worked out.
Yeah, it's rare, I feel, to hear those kind of stories. Like,
it is. I hear, and not to be negative about it, but I hear a lot more. I think down endings than happy endings in a sense. Yeah. And but this book feels like it obviously it launched Grant Morrison's career in a lot of ways. I mean, it took him to some other levels. It's a great showcase for you. You've done amazing work, and I think it, as I said, holds up. You got to leave on your own terms. It sounds like it was kind of a happy ending to some extent.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No,
I guess begs the question, because I have to ask. I don't think you always want to go back to the past, but if DC said, you know what, we need to do a just giant 64-page Grant Richard comes back, does a return to this work, and we'll do an issue, or we'll do a small run. Would you ever revisit this, or is it?
Oh yeah, I would jump at the opportunity.
Yeah.
If logistically everything else fell into place, that would be great fun. Actually, even when Gerard was working on the book, I had talks with Gerard about the possibility of doing a fill-in issue or something like that. It didn't work out, but we at least had some chats about it, kind of thing. I'm not even sure what the status of Doom Patrol itself is right now. That Young Animal is, no longer. But
I don't think DC knows either at the moment.
Yeah, kind of. Like even it felt like which is a shame because it's like with the TV show, and it's like the TV show is done pretty well. It's like you would think that this is an opportunity to make inroads as to like, let's get these characters out there on the page again too. But yeah, I don't know that they know what they're doing with it.
I think, I don't know, it's pure speculation at this point, but as they kind of move into this next phase of their life, and there's a season 3 and 4 and other things coming out, I suspect other people at Warner Media are going to start asking questions like, hey, let's at least make sure that the omnibus is readily available. Everybody's got it. And maybe it is a time to do a one shot or something. It feels like there's at least some thought towards synergy, whether they pull it off or not, who knows? But
right.
But as a fan, I'd love to see it. I
would too.
See it, so
whether I worked on it or not, it's like, I'd love to see, just something else done with the characters that brings them back in a positive light.
Yeah, so you got to read some of the Gerard run then, and so you're a fan and artist who reads the stuff after you've left the book, which I know is like
that's not true with all the Doom Patrol stuff that came after. It's like
no, sure, no.
Some of it felt like they were just trying to do away with the stuff that we did, and I was like, well, I don't really care for that so much. No. I mean, I would have if it was interesting, honestly, but some of it was not interesting to me.
It kind of raced pretty quickly. It was to actually speak to the power of this run. When the John Byrne bit came out, I remember that there was a fan reaction of, why is this no, this is wrong. You've taken a wrong direction. Yeah. You've got to, you can't erase all this stuff. I mean, there was at that point some real anger, which I didn't see when you started your run with Grant. There was not that sense of you're changing something while you're doing it. And think of an artist like a John Byrne, who does have a huge name and obviously a big following. Yeah. But the loyalty to your run was so strong that was largely rejected.
Yeah. And I think some of that was just, I mean, John always loved the original Doom Patrol, and he wanted to, which, that's fair, but it's like, you don't have to rip apart everything we did. So
yeah, it got. I mean, they definitely seemed to hijack it and go back, but it just. I guess
it didn't stay that way, at least. So that's I can say that much about it.
It speaks to a good story will in the fans' minds will surpass any number of superstar artists you bring on to do anything if the story and the quality of this work. I mean, that's the wrong words to use, but hopefully you know what I mean. It's like, it's just, this one was so good that it didn't matter really what they did afterward. People wanted this to be retained. And that's awesome. So,
yeah. And certainly I have huge respect for John Byrne because,
he's done great stuff.
Obviously he was one of the artists I've loved growing up. So his run on XMen is amazing. And he's a huge part of what made that success, more than, or as much as Chris's writing, John brought a lot into the stories as well. Yeah. It wasn't just the art. That's clear the more you read up on their time working on that book together. So, but I just didn't necessarily care for his vision of what he wanted to do with Doom Patrol.
Everybody's done something that you like and you like, I think.
Absolutely. Largely true.
I wanted to, I don't know, Joe, I didn't want to take up all your afternoon here, but I did want to, was there any other thoughts you had about your run here that we missed? That
I did have a blast doing it. It was an awesome opportunity to work on that book, and certainly developed a great fondness for the characters. I even told, it was just going back to like when I got to visit the Doom Patrol set. I specifically really wanted to meet Diane Guerrero just because I definitely always thought of Jane as being a bit of my baby, you know.
Yeah.
That I put a lot of myself into that character, and so being able to talk to her and hear her, like, she did a lot of research. She read the omnibus before even starting the role.
That's
She
awesome.
read When Rabbit Howls, which is the source material that Grant read, and then I also read of the story of Trudy Chase, who was the basis of Crazy Jane. So it delves deeply into, you know, how abuse can cause the splinter of personalities. And so hearing that and just being able to talk to her and knowing, yeah, this character's in great hands, and just seeing, obviously seeing her performance of being able to capture all these different personalities so well, and even hearing her like talk about, like, yeah, I work with my acting coach. We have a journal as to, here are the, you know, voice cues, body cues, you know, different cues that I use to like separate one personality from another. I was like, yeah, I just love hearing that kind of, you know, thought went into it. Just to know a character that I cared that much about, you know, even though I drew her so long ago, that, you know, that she was taking care of her, kind of thing. So.
Yeah. It came across. It felt like a good rendition, and I think one of the better, certainly, efforts from the DCEU as it's put out. I think that series holds up really nicely.
Yeah.
I don't know. This entire run is as I mentioned to Joe before. It's one of the top 10 runs in for me of comics I've read, and this. I mean, even without, even if we hadn't had the interview, it was a good excuse to go back and reread this. Always, fun.
Yeah. I will say, it's like, you know, when the trades did, when you talked about when the trades did come back out, or when they first brought them back out, that was my first time rereading them myself, even, you know, all the way through, and it was, it was interesting. Like, obviously, there's things in the art that I see as like, oh god, I would have drawn that so differently now, that kind of stuff. But as a story, as an overall storyline arc, you know, I still felt like it held up pretty well, and it was still enjoyable to read. And it was also just brought back some fond memories of, you know, things I was thinking at the time when I drew them and that kind of stuff. So it was cool.
Yeah.
Absolutely great stuff. I don't know, Joe. I just had a great time reading it. I think you did too.
Oh yeah, no, it's always good to come back to this. You know, read it more than a few times at this point, and it's always a pleasure.
So I think for people who are you know, coming into this newer, you haven't seen this, I would definitely recommend you pick up this this omnibus. It's easier to find now. I think you can pick it up in a bunch of different places.
And if you can't find the hardcover, I mean, it's also in the 3-volume soft cover, and somehow that might be easier to read than the giant brick of a book. That
yes, definitely, it's easy.
But,
definitely, I would agree.
There is something about that nice big package.
Oh, it's so. Did you ever imagine in your wildest dreams when you were doing this, like someday someone's going to put together a gigantic book with every issue?
Not at all.
It's definitely worth reading, and don't miss Doom Force either. I know a lot of people who somehow who are coming back to it now. They managed to miss that issue, and you've got to. That's all part of the experience.
Well, thankfully, it's in the collection too. So.
Yes, exactly. You can't get in the omnibus. I definitely think it's worth picking up if you're a fan of Grant Morrison. You haven't gone here. I think this is probably a I don't know. I don't want to say truer rendition, but it definitely is it's one where he feels a little bit more free than his time with Justice League and XMen and Batman and other things. There's a lot more ideas on the page, and
I would agree with that. And that's, you know, and it's not as crazy as the Invisibles, you know, whereas like where he just starts, like, there's certain elements where he just like almost went a little more unfiltered there, and it's like I think there was something with the Doom Patrol stuff. This is just my personal opinion on it, but there was just some other things that helped anchor it that made it work in some ways. That it carries over the test of time a little bit more than, say, even the Invisibles did.
Yeah, I would agree with you. There's especially when you read it all together, you do. I don't know. I have the feeling like there was an end game kind of in mind from the first issue. You do get a complete story. It's just, and I feel like that misses from time to time with some of the other work, but. Absolutely great stuff in it, and I think it's no small part in due to you and the work you put on the page, and it definitely feels like work you put on the page, and it's excellent stuff.
Oh, I do appreciate that.
So, Richard, thanks you very much, and Joe, of course, as always, for spending the time talking with us today. And
absolutely,
thank you again for having me.